business owner renting your space, you're going to want to listen into today's episode. We're going to explore about how commercial property can actually become a key part of your business strategy and why it might be more achievable than you think.
This is probably one of my favorite topics, Sam, and I'm super excited. We're going to be sharing some real strategies, some stories, and show you how this can actually work for you. And I might actually just dip into a couple of numbers, but I don't want to get too deep into the numbers over here. We're going to scratch that surface.
Love it, love it, love it. You are listening to the Revolve Commercial Property Podcast. I'm Samantha Riley, your co-host for today, alongside Mish, who is the absolute expert here. Now, Mish, you've helped many business owners move away from renting their commercial spaces to actually becoming property investors. And not just investors, really strategic owners who want to use their property to grow their business. And as someone that's in business, I think that this is really important to pay attention to is the entire holistic strategy. So why do you think more people don't consider this sooner?
This is a really, really interesting question. And I've had this debate with a multiple amount of business people. And you kind of got two frames of thought over here. The one frame of thought is you've got some people that are just focused on business and building their businesses, and they're not interested in property, and they're not interested in the trials and tribulations in property. If their businesses are giving them a 20-30% return, then they're saying, well, why would we buy the property? Okay, so we have very interesting debates. We'll dig a little bit deeper into that. Then you've got the other frame of thought where businesses are growing exponentially, plus they purchase their own building. And in purchasing your own building, obviously, you've got a lot of write-offs, you've got a lot of tax write-offs, you've got depreciation, you've got all of those aspects that if you own your own commercial property, you'd have that anyway, and they'd factor that in. Which means that effectively what they're doing is it's called a leaseback, where they've got their business as an entity, and then they've got the building as a totally separate entity. And the best way to do this would be that the business is renting from the building. Okay, so they're two totally separate independent entities, and you're getting a tax write-off and a cross-pollination right across that. You as the owner are benefiting on both sides.
I love that. But there's definitely some common myths floating around. And I would say one of them, when I think back, when I owned my dance studio back in the 90s, our studio came up for sale. And I remember at the time saying to my business partner, we should buy this. And a lot of, at the time, I didn't think this through. I got my advice from people at the barbecue who told me, yes, all right, let's dive into that. But the barbecue people told me the bank will never lend money for a commercial property. You need so much more money to buy for commercial. And it had to do with the fact if it was vacant, it sits there for longer. That's what the barbecue people told me, that you need millions to get started and it's only for experienced investors. So can you do me a favor? If I could go back to my early 90s self, can you just break down all of these common myths floating around from the perspective of an expert?
I'm so pleased you brought that up. So pleased you brought it up. Let's just debunk that, and then I'm going to ask you a pertinent question, okay?
Oh, interesting.
All right. So basically, you need between 25 to 35% as a deposit. And now it doesn't matter where that deposit comes from and what it is. And it doesn't matter who you are either, incidentally. Because if you've got 25 to 35% deposit, you can buy a commercial property. All right. So that is fact number one. All right. Fact number two would be if you have a lease on that property, the property is basically, the lease is paying for the mortgage, the property, which means that it's a no-doc loan, which means that the lending, whoever you're getting your lending from, don't look at you as the individual. They're going to look at the lease and the strength of the lease and say, Miss individual, whoever you are, entity can purchase X property. Now, I want to ask you a question, Sam.
Yeah.
When you were looking at purchasing that property, how much would you have been purchasing it for?
Oh my goodness, it was such a long time ago, I can't remember. Do you wanna make like, it was yeah, just make up a number and take us through it.
Okay, so let's say it was 500,000, all right?
Yep.
500,000 in the 90s, and I'm going to assume that it was Sunshine Coast, Brisbane, somewhere around
It
about
was actually Adelaide.
Adelaide. Even better. Okay, even because Adelaide's prices have gone through the roof. So if we're looking at a property, it probably wasn't even 500,000, it was probably about 100,000
It
in those days.
yeah.
That property would probably be worth, and this is just a thumbsuck, that property would probably be worth at 100,000 over the period of time we're talking about. Wow, that property would probably be worth close to about 900,000 now. Okay.
Uh-huh.
The amount of money that you could have made out of that property is just, I'm not even going to speculate. I'd have to
Uh-huh.
you just sit down and do, but it is just, it's a no brainer. You know, it's an asset that would have been paying you back, and you'd be paying yourself back by having a lease back on that property.
Mhm.
Should you have decided not to keep it, you could have either rented it out, you could have moved on if you decided to give up the studio, and or you could have sold it as a going concern. So there are just so many options that you can do with something like that. But you know, bricks and mortar, if you've got bricks and mortar in your portfolio, it's something that is tangible. You can touch it, you can feel it, you can do something with it. That's what I always
Mm.
say.
Yeah, I love that. Can we dive a little bit more into these practicalities that you were just talking about? What does it look like to use commercial property as part of your business strategy? Can you just unpack that a little bit more?
Okay, so besides the fact that you have an asset that is increasing in value, okay, you're driving your rental through your business, and you can dictate what that rental is as and when it works for your business.
Mm.
All right. So if you are driving a rental through your business, let's say for argument's sake, your business, let's just take $1 million. All right. Your business can afford $1 million. You're putting 30, let's say 30,000 down. You're getting a 70% loan on that. And you've got a rental of, I'm going to be kind over here and say about 60,000. So that's a 6% net yield. All right. That your business is now paying for, because your business is paying for it in rent. But
Mhm.
you, as the building owner, is earning that because you're receiving it as a rental. So you're earning that at a 6% yield. If you've got a 70% loan on it at around about 6.5%, it's only 70%, which means that that property is positive straight away because you're putting 35,000 or 30,000 equity cash into it straight away, which means that
Mhm.
you are earning rental, you're earning profit out of your building while you're earning profit out of your business. You're invoicing the rental, which means that it's tax write off in your business, and you can write that off in your building as well. Okay, so from that perspective, you've now got two incomes, not just one.
Mhm. No brainer, right? What about if I was in a little 50 square meter space, but 100 square meter space came up? Would you consider, or would it be a consideration to purchase that property and sublet the rest of the space, or is that a problem?
I love your thinking, Sam. I absolutely love your thinking. That's exactly one of the case studies that I was going to speak about here, which actually happened to one of our clients. They had a very big woodworking business. With the way that things were going, their office was getting smaller and smaller, and they had a beautiful A-class office. And they asked me, what do they do with this? And I said, subdivide and sublet. So
Mm.
I ended up letting it out, get this, to a beauty salon. Now it's in a semi-industrial area. Okay.
Yeah.
You're going to ask yourself, why a beauty salon in a
Uh-huh, that's the
semi-industrial
first thing
area?
I was thinking. Yeah.
So here's the catch. The beauty salon was in an area where they were paying a lot more rent. It was more central. And this wasn't very far around. It was literally like 2 or 3 roads away from it. And the office component was on the front of the building, and the industrial component was around the back of the building. And it was on a corner.
Uh-huh.
And the office component was beautiful. It was a beautiful fit out already. And when I asked the tenant about that, she said, oh, it's a no brainer because there's so much parking here. Her clients can drive right up to the front door,
Mm.
step out, and they're there straight away. So they actually set up, it was about 2 or 3 businesses. So it was her facial business, and then they had a beauty business, and it was allied businesses on the back of an industrial building. So subletting, absolutely. If you've got any additional space, you want to be subletting that, and that is additional income.
Mm. And you even brought up some really cool points there, like the fact that there was parking out the front. Because being able to think through the eyes of who your ideal customers are going to be and actually thinking about some of those things might make you think outside the box. Because when you first said beauty salon, I was like, really? There? But then as you were explaining that, as someone that needs a lot of help in that area, I love the idea of being able to park out the front. I'm doing those kinds of appointments all the time, and I hate going to areas where you can't find a park or, in some places where you can only park for an hour and your appointment's 3 hours. Like, that's all really great things to take into consideration. I know that you've helped a heap of people. Do you have another case study or success story that gives us a different perspective?
Look, there's another pretty much the same sort of thing. And again, well, something slightly different where we have an accountant who found a residential property, and they actually did a substantial renovation to the residential property. It was one of those lift ups. And it was at the time that that residential property was rezoned as commercial. What they did is they occupied the upstairs and they renovated beautifully downstairs, and they converted that into a commercial space, and they did subletting. So they subletted to 2 tenants downstairs and continued to run their business upstairs. So that is really, really smart because they bought it at a really good price, which made it affordable to do the lift. And by the time they had the tenants in there, they had the property, get this, they had the property reevaluated after they did the renovations, after they had the new tenants move in, and their property went up 3 times in price.
Wow.
Okay.
So cool.
Yeah. So that is just like, that's off the charts. So if you really want to add value in commercial, that is something that you can be doing. It's those kind of strategies. So basically, the firm of accountants weren't paying rent essentially, or their rent was being paid for them. Being accountants, they were still paying rent because they owed the property. But what I'm saying is because they had brought those extra 2 components in, it paid for the renovation, paid for all the uplift, paid for their rent, and that was it. It was beneficial to their business and beneficial to the property, the ownership of the property itself.
Oh, wow. So good. Does this strategy work better in other areas? Like, for example, does that work better in regional areas? Does it work in capital cities? Do we need to take area into consideration?
Not necessarily, Sam. This could work anywhere. I do have another example of one in a city where it was a physiotherapist who did the same sort of thing. They had too much space. They split it up and they let it out to just one other tenant. In fact, it was the NEIS that moved in there. But the interesting thing is, for those people, and this is just a little bit of a segue, those people who have got self-managed super funds. Now, if you've got a self-managed super fund and you have your own business, you could be doing this in your self-managed super fund. And I can tell you the self-managed supers love this strategy because this is massive income. This is really good cash flow strategy. Self-managed super funds eat this up all day.
Nice.
In fact,
So,
I'll tell you a little story, if I may.
yeah,
We're busy
of course.
doing one at the moment, which is an industrial warehouse. The owner comes from a medical background. Her husband have got 2 or 3 medical consultancies, and they've decided to start a pathology. And they're doing a pathology laboratory in an industrial unit and adding a mezzanine floor on. The mezzanine floor is minimal. It's like 50,000. And they're adding probably I'm estimating around about $500,000 to the value of this property by virtue of the fact that they've added a mezzanine and they're putting a medical into an industrial.
The mind boggles. It sounds like the opportunity is really endless, and it's just like, how can you think outside the box? So if someone is also like me thinking, oh, wow, so many ideas, and someone's watching or listening to this and thinking, where do I even begin? What would you tell them? What are some of the things that we need to consider first up? First action steps, I guess.
Okay, well, firstly, and I think the barrier to entry is always deposit. How much equity do you have? What deposit do you have in order to enter into commercial? So, when you book a strategy call or a discovery call with us, and you can do that via the website, revolvecommercial.com.au, the first thing that we're going to go through is where are you at in your journey and what equity do you have? So, it's fairly simple. Based on what equity you have, I can give you a very sort of vague idea. I'm not licensed to give you financial advice. So this is not disclaimer. This is not financial advice that I'll be giving you.
Mhm.
It would just be a possibility of yes, you can do it or no, you can't. Okay.
Mhm.
What your
Mhm.
basic fundamental needs are going to be in order to go into the strategy.
Like it. So if you're ready to explore how commercial property can work for your business and whether you can lean into this strategy that Mish has been talking about today, head over to revolvecommercial.com.au and definitely book or click that button to book a quick 15-minute call.
And don't forget, if you've got questions, send your questions through. This has brought all sorts of ideas. We've spoken about a couple of things over here. The self-managed super fund, incidentally, the one that the client's doing in a warehouse happens to be a self-managed super fund. And there's no limit. There's absolutely no limit to the size and the value of those kind of properties. But hit the link below. Send us your questions. Always happy to discuss these in Q&As. And guys, I love that interaction with you. And I want to thank you in advance for all of those who do send me questions. I just love giving you the answers and giving you some information.
Absolutely. Those links will be right below as always. So if you're on the treadmill or if you're out walking the dog, you can just scroll below wherever you're listening and click that link to link through and book a call. Mish, thanks so much for having me join you for another episode. I've been hanging out for this for months. I feel like we've both been so busy, we haven't been able to catch up. So thanks so much for having me on your podcast again.
Thank you, Sam, for being the host. It's always lovely chatting to you, and I love having these engaging conversations with you. You ask lovely questions. Thank you.